Segment one, Golden Black Live. Welcome to the show Friday afternoon. And it's never a dull moment around Purdue sports. The Boilermakers will be taking on Minnesota tonight, 7:30 p.m. On the Big Ten Network. Tom Dienhart, as you can see, is in his car making his way maybe to his hotel, I don't know, but to Minneapolis for the game tonight.
Or the mall.
What's that? Or to the Mall of America.
Shopping.
I don't know where you're going, but so is it sunny up in Minneapolis?
Got to get a juicy Lucy, don't I?
Yeah.
It's sunny, a little partly cloudy, and a little nippy, but it's too bad they're not playing right now, guys. It'd be good football weather. It'll get a little chillier tonight, but again, just dry and cool up here right now.
65 degrees, I think, in Lafayette right now. It's about as good as it can get for November the 20th. All right, Brian, and we'll go back and forth here, but this is a big game for Purdue. We've heard some early rumblings this morning that there was a potential COVID issue from Minnesota's front. What's the latest from what you understand?
Well, as I've been told, there have been some concerns on Minnesota's end here, but I don't think it's anything that's going to deep six the game at this point. I would think that if something was going to happen, it would have happened already. Obviously, that doesn't mean the team affected won't have to play a little bit shorthanded. I have no idea the extent of this issue, but for all I know, it could be a situation much like Illinois where they had to play down a bunch of guys. Which would only be another advantage for Purdue here. But I don't think there's any concern necessarily at this point about the game being played. This is obviously 2020 for you. Every game is a game time decision. So I guess we'll find out.
Well, Tom just landed at the airport, so yeah, maybe no. Let's hope they get the game in, and it sounds positive, at least at this point. Though that's not a good choice of words, is it? Tom, obviously a lot of intrigue, outside of the weekly Rondale Moore, which we may get into briefly, but also quarterback. Starting to hear that it's really starting to look maybe a little bit more like Jack Plummer. Maybe Aiden O'Connell is out. We won't know that for sure. You'll know it, I guess, maybe 2 to 3 hours when you see the teams run up and down the field in warm-ups. But Purdue changes a little bit if Plummer's the quarterback.
Yeah, maybe what they lose from a touch and an accuracy standpoint, if O'Connell indeed does not play, guys, they get a little bit of mobility with Jack Plummer, right? And as we've heard Brian say a lot of times, Purdue's got to manufacture a ground game. How they do that can be a variety of ways. One can be with the quarterback's feet. And Plummer certainly is a quarterback who's equipped. I'm not saying he's, Michael Vick or Kyler Murray with his feet, but he's a guy with a little bit of mobility to him. So that would be a benefit that Purdue's offense would be getting as well. And to that end, guys, with this ground game that we know needs a lot of help, maybe we'll see some more King Daru tonight. Saw one carry from him last week. Of course, he missed the first 2 games, dealing with what we believe is a hamstring injury. But again, if they get Drew out there to complement Horvath, and again, if Plummer's a quarterback with his feet, you'd like to think Purdue's ground game could get some traction too, guys. And also remember this, Minnesota has the worst rush defense in the Big Ten, giving up, I think, over 230 yards a game on the ground.
All right, Brian, you drew the short stick on the weekly Rondale Moore question, it seems, and you've certainly built a compelling case for that he may play tonight. We'll find out, I guess, from that standpoint when the time comes. But he would bring a lot to Purdue's offense, certainly as well. That's stating the obvious.
I expect him to play, but I expect him to play last week too. But yeah, he will. I'm more confident this week than I was last week. But I do think he would give you another dimension offensively, clearly. It'll be interesting to see because, the first 2 games of the year, David Bell was so dominant that, maybe if Purdue was jamming the ball to Rondale Moore too, maybe David Bell doesn't quite have the same impact he ended up having. It'll be interesting to see how they kind of strike that balance once they get Rondale Moore back in the lineup. But obviously he's somebody that, everybody has to worry about from a defensive perspective. He makes everyone on Purdue's offense better simply with his sheer presence because he's somebody that's going to require so much awareness on the defense's part. He gives you another big play element. He gives you a guy where you can get a big play without having to complete a ball 25 yards down the field. I think there's real significance in that.
Yeah.
But we obviously also have to look at him as a guy who hasn't played a football game in a year. So who knows how much roughness around the edges there might be here? Who knows how, what kind of playing shape he's in? I don't mean shape physically, but how ready he is to be the player everybody remembers from, the last time we saw him playing, which obviously was against this very Minnesota team. It's funny how bad things always happen to Purdue against Minnesota.
Yeah.
Across the board. But, hopefully for everyone's sake, that little ugly trend doesn't continue tonight.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Obviously, Purdue has never won in TCF Bank Stadium in 5 attempts. It's been a long time since Purdue has won in Minneapolis, 2007, the last victory in Joe Tiller's second to last year. Tom, obviously defensively, George Karlaftis also remains a question mark at best. Hearing me maybe get in there from a situational standpoint tonight. Maybe some other issues. We just don't know in COVID world or in injury world. We're not able to see practice, obviously, and coaches are not giving us a lot of information on injuries. And yet, so Purdue's defense has done some good things in its 3 weeks and 3 games, I should say. It will have its hands full. Minnesota's offense, though it did show it a lot last week, certainly has the capability to cause some problems.
Back in 2007, Alan, I still had hair, buddy.
Yeah,
that's how long ago that was.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I think Brian would agree. The Purdue defense has largely lived up to, I think, expectations so far. Done a good job. They've tackled well, and they've also limited the big plays, right? There have not been a lot of breakdowns as far as, again, yielding those big plays that can be so debilitating to a defense. Yes, there have been some issues overall, but I think, again, by and large, this defense has played well enough for Purdue to win all 3 of these ball games so far. And Alan, to your point about number 5, George Karlaftis, what a gutty kid, right? A lot of people didn't think he would even dress last week, but he was all padded up, ready to go. Wanted to test out that ankle or foot in pregame to see how he felt, if he could maybe go on at least 3rd downs. Was unable to. Maybe this week, guys, maybe tonight, he'll feel good enough to play maybe in pass rush situations. And we all know the benefit that he brings to that defense. They have nobody of his ilk when it comes to rushing the passer. So it'll be fun to see if he gets on the field. We all know how important football is to George. He wants to be good at it. And, again, if he can get out there, he's going to be out there trying to gut it out for the Boilermakers tonight. And like you said, too, Alan, Minnesota only scored 7 points last Friday against Iowa, but this offense, as Purdue fans can surely attest, know how good Minnesota's defense is. And for goodness sakes, Tanner Morgan was 21 of 22 last year for almost 400 yards, 4 touchdowns. They're struggling a little bit there. They lost their offensive coordinator. Kirk Schrock went to Penn State, but still, you got Tanner Morgan back. You got Muhammad Ibrahim, the number 1 rusher in the nation, and 2 big-time wideouts, Chris Altman-Bell, of course, Rashad Bateman. So plenty of skill there to keep Bob Diaco's defense on its toes tonight.
Yeah, you look at last year's performance, Brian, and the RPO caused some problems for Purdue. Tanner Morgan was just on fire and had, it was a game. It was a 38-31 game. Didn't seem like it was as close as that. Purdue kind of closed it up down the stretch. But you can't have that type of performance. Obviously, defending that, Purdue can't let that those numbers come at them again this year.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, I'm just stating obvious things.
Yeah,
today,
yeah. No, they have to do a much better job defensively. I think they're going to throw more looks at Minnesota this year than they did last year. I think, from a defensive line perspective, Purdue's got to disrupt everything at the line of scrimmage this year, and the best way to stop an RPO is to blow the whole damn thing up. And if Purdue can get some penetration up the middle, if they can stay disciplined in the back half of their defense, I would think that they would stand a much better chance this year than they did last year. I think this is a very different Purdue defense. Thus far, this seems to be a very different Minnesota offense too. So I don't know how much water last year's game necessarily holds in terms of relevance to this one. But Purdue obviously knows what's coming in terms of what happened last year. And, the one thing Jeff Brom has been doing this season is talking very, very openly about teams who have, beaten Purdue and the things that have happened to them against some of these opponents. So I'm sure he's been reminding his team of just how bad that Minnesota game was last year and diagnosing all the minutia that went into it. And a big piece of that obviously was the fact that Purdue could not stop the run pass option.
2 years ago, Tom, I think you were on the sidelines working up in Minneapolis in that 21-degree debacle where Purdue just got hammered. It's going to be much nicer tonight, like you mentioned. The weather, I think, in the mid-30s, dry and all that kind of good stuff. I think we may have lost Tom on that back end. But Brian, I'll switch to you. You go to this. This is PJ Fleck and has had Purdue's number the last 2 years. Jeff Brom obviously got the job done in the first year. Still, it's an interesting, just because both guys came in the same time, they recruit against each other a fair amount. That makes for a little bit of an interesting dynamic when it comes to this game.
Yeah, I don't think there's a coach in the Big Ten who doesn't want to beat PJ Fleck.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the nature of his approach to things, the nature of his recruiting tactics, all of that kind of stuff. And I'm sure that Purdue has not enjoyed the last two meetings with Minnesota. I'm sure they would love to not only win this one, but twist the knife as much as you can while Minnesota, appears to be down. But the one thing I would say about this game is that Minnesota can't be as bad as it's been. I mean, you can't have that experience at quarterback. You can't have so much back from a team that was really good last year and be as bad as they've been. So I would expect – I always think it's a good approach to expect the best form of your opponents as opposed to the worst form of your opponents. Right. And I would expect a much better version of Minnesota tonight than the one that looked completely dominated by Iowa, that lost at home to Maryland on a missed extra point. Things like that. I don't think Purdue can take anything for granted tonight just because Minnesota has struggled early. If they've got a bunch of COVID issues, as we believe they do, if that takes a bite out of the roster, then Minnesota's really got its work cut out for it probably. But all things being equal, I would not take Minnesota lightly by any means if I were Purdue.
Yeah, I think it's a good tact, and Purdue's in no position to do that. I think we have Mr. Dienhart back with us here. That's the beauty of Zoom here. We're the Zoom kings here from that standpoint.
I had a low battery. I had to get my thing plugged in, and somehow it kicked me out. So sorry about that.
That's all right. All right. Now I'm going to ask you both. What's the one thing that Purdue must do well? What is the sure sign that if Purdue's going to be successful? And don't give me a smart apple thing like more points. Just tell me what's the one sure sign that Purdue will win tonight if this happens. What does it take?
Run the football. It's for me. Yeah, it's that simple for me. It's run the football. I talked about that a little bit earlier. The need to run the football. Purdue struggled to do that outside of Xander Horvath. And as we all know, guys, this is football 101, right? Typically, the team that runs the ball better wins the game. And my gosh, if Purdue can get a ground game established to complement an offense that could have Rondale Moore as well as David Bell and those tight ends, I mean, that Minnesota defense, which is already in tatters, would really struggle, I think, to slow down Purdue's offense no matter who's playing quarterback.
Okay, what's the one thing you're watching for, Brian?
Just extend drives. Just be more productive on first down, be better on third down, keep a bad defense on the field as much as you can. Obviously, everybody wants big plays. Everybody wants to be able to possess the ball with a running game, things like that. But just keep them on the field. Keep your offense on the field. Let your defense take some pressure off your defense. Let them be on the sideline for extended stretches of the game. That's something Purdue really struggled with against Northwestern, was to simply stay on the field. There were a lot of 3-and-outs. There were a lot of situations where you had third manageable and couldn't get it done. I think that's really important tonight, among many things, but I think that's really important tonight.
All right. I'm going to switch gears to basketball, and this is there's it's so crazy about this. We've got a basketball season that's due to start next week. Purdue will be taking on Liberty, we think, or we understand, and the Big Ten schedule was announced. Brian, I'll come back to you. Obviously, a lot of intrigue again with that, the Eric Hunter injury, but also this is a team that is going to be interesting to watch just because you've got a lot of new faces. Where are we with the start of the year? We know there's a schedule, a Big Ten schedule, and from all things we understand, it's going to start next week.
Yeah, that's our understanding. I don't anticipate there being any issues with that, but who anticipates anything nowadays? Purdue's got its work cut out for it here, pretty early in the season without Eric Hunter. He was, as I've said many times, he was Purdue's clear-cut second best player, if not 1B to Travion Williams 1A. He was sort of the face of so much of what matters to this team in terms of needing more experience, needing more leadership, needing better guard play, needing more scoring punch, needing a defensive catalyst. I think he was a guy a lot of that was invested in. They've really got their work cut out for him. Ethan Morton, too, may be back at practice here pretty soon, but what kind of shape he's going to be in after having mono these last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Purdue's just shorthanded in its backcourt. They're going to have a lot to overcome here early in the season, but they like their newcomers. Their newcomers have to be ready now. As Matt Painter said to me yesterday, you can bring along one guy at a time who maybe is young and doesn't quite know what he's doing yet, but it's really hard to do it when it's like 3 or 4 guys. And right now, everybody who's practicing for Purdue has to play because you have 11 scholarship guys. 3 of them have been out of the mix. So that leaves you with 8 guys. They all have to play, and half of them are young. Most of them are young and haven't played in a college game yet. So Purdue's going to amount to a brand new team out there this starting next week, and they're going to have a little bit to overcome. But obviously, I think their hopes are high. They've got a lot of potential too. Yeah,
it's going to be an interesting deal, and we'll have a lot more on that as we continue to progress through not only the end of November, but through December as well. Okay, we're going to take a short break and bring in Sean Williams from Gopher Report who will give us a little bit more on the Gophers. Brian, we appreciate your time as always, and
I'm out.
We'll look you are out in a minute shortly, and we will also look forward to chatting here. We'll have our post-game video as well. So, Gordon, we'll go take a short break and be back in a couple minutes on Golden Black Live.